The dead morning light crept slowly over the horizon, staining the mansion's windows with a soft gold glow. Maya sat stiffly on the edge of a velvet armchair in the grand sitting room, still wrapped in the same damp coat she had worn the night before. She hadn't slept. The events of the night replayed in her mind in loops. The boy's blue lips, the injection, the roar of that man's voice, the mansion, and the strange, heavy way Vincent Maddox looked at her as if she were both an enigma and a problem he intended to solve. She had intended to leave hours ago, but each time she approached the door, one of his people, efficient, polite, but unmistakably firm, would remind her that Mr. Maddox wants a word before you go. So she stayed. Eventually, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway, steady and deliberate. Vincent entered the room like a man who expected spaces to accommodate him. He had changed into a dark gray suit that fit his tall frame perfectly. Even without saying a word, his presence altered the atmosphere. The room seemed to draw tighter around him. His pale eyes found her instantly, and that same unreadable expression settled over his face. "You didn't sleep," he observed. More statement than question. "Not exactly the kind of place where I can just nod off," Maya replied, her voice steady but tired. His lips twitched, whether in amusement or irritation she couldn't tell. He gestured toward the large table where a breakfast spread had been laid out. Silver trays gleaming, fruits arranged like art, steam rising from a carafe of fresh coffee. "Eat," he said. Maya crossed her arms. "I don't need charity." "This isn't charity," Vincent replied calmly, taking a seat at the head of the table. "You saved my son's life. You are my guest until I say otherwise." The bluntness of his tone irritated her, but the aroma of coffee was too strong to resist. She poured herself a cup and sat at the far end of the table, keeping as much distance as the furniture allowed. Vincent poured himself one too, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. For a few moments they sat in silence, broken only by the faint sounds of the household coming to life, somewhere deep in the mansion. Finally Vincent spoke, his voice measured. "I owe you a debt." Maya put down her cup slowly. "You don't owe me anything." "I didn't save Leo for a reward." "That's irrelevant," Vincent replied without hesitation. "In my world, debts are currency. Unpaid debts are vulnerabilities, and I do not leave vulnerabilities unresolved." Maya frowned. "Your world. You keep saying that like it's separate from everyone else's, but it isn't. Your son nearly died. I helped, that's it. There's no transaction here." Vincent leaned back slightly, studying her. "You think like someone who lives by rules written on paper. I live by rules written in blood. Gratitude isn't enough. A life saved creates a bond, whether you want it or not. So tell me, what do you want?" The question hit her like a slap. "What do I want?" She repeated incredulously. "I want to go home. I want to take a shower. I want to sleep. That's what I want." He tilted his head almost as if examining a rare species. "No money, no favor? Not even protection?" "From what?" Maya shot back. "I have my own life. I don't need yours." For the first time, Vincent's composure cracked slightly, not in anger but in curiosity. Most people who crossed his path either feared him or sought to use him. This woman did neither. She was not impressed by his wealth, not intimidated by his authority, and certainly not eager to be indebted to him. "You're either very brave," he said quietly, "or very naive." Maya met his gaze squarely. "I'm neither. I just don't believe kindness should come with a price tag." Their exchange was interrupted by the sound of soft footsteps. Leo appeared at the doorway, clutching a stuffed bear, his hair tousled from sleep. His small voice broke through the heavy air. "Papa?" Vincent's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The hard edges softened as he rose and crossed the room to his son, lifting him into his arms. "How do you feel?" Leo buried his face in his father's shoulder. "Better." Then he peeked shyly over Vincent's shoulder at Maya. "Thank you for helping me." Maya felt something warm stir in her chest. She smiled softly. "You're welcome, sweetheart. You scared me a little, you know that?" Leo giggled faintly, the sound fragile but genuine. Vincent watched the interaction with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. He seemed almost unsettled by how easily his son gravitated toward this stranger. After breakfast, Vincent gestured for Maya to follow him to his study. She hesitated at the threshold. The room was unlike anything she'd ever seen, a space designed for power. Shelves lined with leather-bound books, A massive oak desk and walls adorned with old family portraits that seemed to watch every move. Vincent closed the door behind them. "I've arranged for a car to take you home," he began. "But before you go, I'm offering you something." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Offering me?" "Yes." He moved behind his desk, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. "You're a nurse. Or you were. I did some checking. You worked in pediatric ICU until 3 years ago. Good reputation, excellent under pressure. Then you disappeared from the system. Why?" The question hit her like cold water. "That's none of your business," she snapped. "In my house, under my protection, everything is my business," he replied evenly. "People don't just walk away from careers like that unless something significant happens." Maya's chest tightened. Memories she'd tried to bury clawed their way up. The hospital room, the sound of machines, the mistake she had made. Or rather, the choice that had cost her everything. She turned away sharply. "I don't owe you my story." Vincent regarded her silently for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But the offer stands. I have resources. I could help you. Rebuild whatever was broken." She laughed bitterly. "You think money fixes everything? Some things don't get rebuilt. Some things just end." "I don't believe that," he said softly. "Everything can be rebuilt. With the right leverage." Maya shook her head. "You don't understand. Some things you don't buy your way out of." Vincent didn't push further, but the intensity in his gaze lingered. "Very well. If you won't name your price, then I'll name it for you. From this moment on, you are under my protection. If anyone touches you, they answer to me." Maya stared at him, stunned. "I didn't ask for your protection." "You don't have to," he replied calmly. "You saved my son. Whether you like it or not, that binds us. And in my world, protection isn't optional, it's inevitable." His words left her reeling. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped when she saw the finality in his expression. There was no room for negotiation. In his eyes, this wasn't a matter of preference but of law. A law older and far less forgiving than anything she knew. When the car finally dropped her off outside her modest apartment building, Maya stood on the cracked pavement staring after it as it disappeared down the street. She had stepped into his world for one night, but his world had followed her home. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't over. She turned toward her building, unaware of the black sedan that lingered half a block away, watching. Shadows of the Past, Section 1. The next few days unfolded like a strange dream, one that oscillated between the familiar rhythm of Maya's ordinary life and the unsettling echoes of something she couldn't quite name. At first, she tried to tell herself that the night behind Fenmore Street was just an extraordinary event in an otherwise simple existence. She went back to her small apartment, returned to her shifts at the pharmacy, and forced herself to focus on mundane tasks, counting pills, ringing up purchases, restocking shelves. On the surface, everything looked the same, but the world had shifted in ways she couldn't ignore. It began subtly. When she walked home at night, she noticed a car parked at the corner of her street, a black sedan with tinted windows. It never followed her openly, but she could feel the weight of its presence like a shadow pressed against her back. One evening, she turned abruptly to confront it, but the engine purred to life and it slipped away like smoke. Then there were the neighbors. Mrs. Patterson from across the hall whispered that a well-dressed man had been seen lingering near the building's entrance, pretending to check his phone but clearly watching. Maya tried to convince herself it was paranoia. But deep down she knew. Vincent Maddox had said, "From this moment on, you are under my protection." She had dismissed it at the time as some kind of grand, archaic statement. But it wasn't a statement. It was a promise. And promises in his world were binding. The strange surveillance should have frightened her more than it did. But what truly unsettled her were the phone calls. They started 3 days after that night. Unlisted numbers, short pauses, and then a hang-up. No voice, no threats, just silence. Each time the sound burrowed into her nerves a little deeper. She told herself not to panic. She told herself she had survived worse. But at night, lying in bed, she would catch herself staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding in the quiet. On the 4th evening, after a particularly long shift, Maya unlocked the door to her apartment and froze. A single white envelope sat on the floor just inside the door. There was no address, no name, just her first name written in careful block letters. She knelt, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. Inside was a small glossy photograph. Her heart lurched. It was a picture of her walking down the street earlier that day, headphones in, coffee in hand, unaware. The angle suggested someone had been following her closely. Beneath the photo, a single line was scrawled in red ink. "You picked the wrong boy to save." The room spun slightly. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. The weight of what she had stepped into hit her fully then, not as a whisper but as a cold, undeniable truth. She wasn't just under Vincent's protection, she was in someone's crosshairs. For the first time in years, a familiar instinct returned, the one she had buried after leaving the hospital. She reached for her phone and scrolled to the number she had saved but never intended to use, the one from the card inside Leo's coat. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Part of her screamed to stay away. She had fought so hard to build a quiet, anonymous life. Calling that number would be like opening a door she couldn't close. But then she looked at the photograph again. Whoever had sent it wasn't playing games. She pressed the button. The line connected almost immediately. "Maya," Vincent's voice came through, calm and low, as if he had expected this call. Her chest tightened. "How do you always know it's me?" "I make it my business to know," he replied evenly. "What happened?" She hesitated. "Someone left a photo at my door. Of me, today, and a message." She forced her voice to remain steady. "They said I picked the wrong boy to save." There was a pause on the other end, but she could sense the shift like a predator catching a new scent. "Do not leave your apartment," Vincent said finally, his voice turning sharp. "I'm sending someone." "No, wait," Maya started, but the line went dead. She stared at the phone, frustration rising. She didn't want him to send someone. She didn't want his world invading hers. But as she stood in the quiet apartment with that photograph lying on the counter, she realized she no longer had the luxury of wanting. Some choices are made for you. 20 minutes later, a knock echoed through her hallway. When she opened the door, 2 men in dark suits stood there. Neither of them the bodyguards she had seen before, but their posture and silence made their affiliation obvious. One of them handed her a phone. Vincent's voice was on the line again. "I told you," he said without preamble. "When you saved my son, you became part of this. That means those who want to hurt me will look at you and see opportunity. You are now a message waiting to be written. I won't allow that." Maya pressed her lips together, trying to control the tremor in her voice. "I didn't sign up for this." "No one ever does," he replied softly. "But now you have a choice. Accept my protection fully or walk into a storm you can't see." She wanted to argue. She wanted to throw his words back at him. But the truth was staring at her from the photograph. She wasn't dealing with vague danger. She was dealing with someone who had gotten close enough to capture her without her even noticing. Whoever they were skilled. And they were watching. The storm. The storm did not begin with thunder or lightning. It began with silence. The kind of silence that falls before something breaks. The pause between inhale and exhale when the air itself seems to know change is coming. For Maya, that silence stretched across the days that followed her call to Vincent. He had stationed people outside her building, shadowy figures who never introduced themselves, but whose presence made the neighbors whisper and scatter like leaves in the wind. At first she resented it, resented how her privacy had been stripped away without her permission. But then one evening, as she walked home from work, she saw the glint of a camera lens in the alley pointed straight at her window. By the time she alerted one of Vincent's men, the watcher had vanished. That was when Maya stopped resenting his interference. Because suddenly it wasn't interference anymore. It was survival. Her world had been cracked open, and no matter how tightly she tried to close it, shadows seeped through the gaps. It was a Thursday night when Vincent himself appeared at her door again. He didn't knock timidly or wait for permission. He simply arrived, his tall frame filling the doorway, his presence carrying that same quiet force she was beginning to recognize. He wore no suit tonight, just a dark shirt open at the collar, his eyes harder than usual. Leo was with him, his small hand wrapped in his father's larger one. Maya blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice tight. Vincent's gaze swept over her modest apartment, his expression unreadable. "It's no longer safe for him in the house," he said, nodding toward Leo. "Too many eyes. Too many cracks in walls I thought impenetrable." Maya frowned, confusion and alarm rising. "So you brought him here?" "This isn't a fortress. This is just a place no one would expect," Vincent interrupted, his voice calm but heavy. Sometimes the safest place is the one that looks weakest. Maya looked down at Leo, who gave her a tired smile, his cheeks still pale from his recent ordeal. The boy carried with him an innocence that made her heart ache. Despite the danger surrounding him, he clung to small things, the bear in his hand, the soft trust in his eyes when he looked at her. Against her better judgment, she found herself softening. She let them in. The hours that followed were a blur. Vincent didn't sleep. He stood by the window watching the street below with the vigilance of a sentinel. His men rotated silently in and out, bringing updates in hushed voices. Maya tried to rest on the couch, but her mind was restless. Something was coming. She could feel it like the pressure in the air before a storm breaks. It came at dawn. The sound of shattering glass tore through the apartment, followed by the sharp crack of wood splintering. Maya jolted upright. Leo cried out in fear. Vincent was already moving, his body a blur of controlled precision. Within seconds, 2 masked men stormed through the front door, weapons in hand, their voices barking orders. "Grab the kid," one shouted. Maya's instincts surged forward before her fear could. She scooped Leo into her arms and darted toward the back hallway. But another figure appeared from the shadows, blocking her path. His mask covered his face, but his eyes glinted with malice. He lunged, grabbing her arm. Panic flared, but she tightened her hold on Leo and fought back, kicking hard against his shin. The man cursed and staggered, but his grip didn't loosen. Then Vincent was there. He moved with terrifying speed, his fist colliding with the intruder's jaw, sending him crashing to the ground. Another attacker swung toward him, but Vincent caught his wrist, twisted, and disarmed him with brutal efficiency. The man crumpled. It was not a clean fight. It was raw, messy, and desperate, but it carried the weight of a father who had no intention of losing his child again. Maya clutched Leo tightly, pressing him against her chest as she backed into the corner, her breath ragged. She had seen fear before, seen patience at the edge of life, seen families crumble under grief. But this was different. This was chaos incarnate, crashing into her tiny apartment and ripping through the fragile walls of her ordinary life. When the last intruder finally hit the floor, groaning and unconscious, Vincent straightened, chest heaving. Blood streaked his knuckles. His eyes scanned the room, cold and ruthless, until they landed on Maya and Leo. The hardness broke then, replaced by something raw. He crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling in front of them. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, urgent. Maya shook her head, though her arms trembled around Leo. "We're fine." Leo clung to both of them, tears streaking his face. "Papa, I was scared." Vincent wrapped an arm around his son, pulling him close. "I know, my boy, I know. But you're safe now." Maya's breath hitched. Safe. The word felt fragile in her mouth, almost laughable after what had just unfolded. But as she looked at Vincent kneeling there with his son clutched tightly, she saw something she hadn't expected. Vulnerability. Beneath the armor of power and ruthlessness, he was just a man, a father, fighting to protect the only thing that truly mattered to him. The police never came. They weren't called. Vincent made a single phone call, quiet and clipped, and within minutes the bodies were carried out by his men. The shattered glass swept away, the evidence of violence erased as if it had never happened. To the outside world, the storm had passed without notice, but inside Maya knew something fundamental had changed. Her life was no longer her own. Later, when the apartment was quiet again and Leo finally slept curled on the couch, Vincent stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the early morning light. Maya approached slowly, her arms wrapped around herself. "This can't go on," she said softly. "You can't keep bringing this into my life." "I didn't ask for it." You didn't choose it," Vincent interrupted, his voice low but steady. "But neither did I. Enemies make choices for us." She shook her head. "I just wanted to help a child. That's all. I didn't mean to step into whatever this is." Vincent turned then, his pale eyes locking onto hers. For the first time, his voice carried not just command but plea. "And yet you did. And now I will not let you walk away. Because the moment you touched my son's life, you touched mine, and those who wish to destroy me will not forget that." Maya swallowed hard. There was a weight to his words, a truth she couldn't deny. The photograph, the men, the fight, they were proof that this storm was larger than her, larger than anything she had ever faced. Her past had already broken her once. Now it seemed her present was determined to test whether she could stand again, and though she wanted to scream to push him away, to retreat into the safe obscurity she had built, a part of her, small, trembling, but undeniable, knew she couldn't. Because in the heart of the storm, sometimes the only way to survive was to hold on, and she was holding on now, not just for herself but for Leo. The choice, Section 1. The day after the attack dawned gray and brittle, like the world itself was holding its breath. Maya stood in the small kitchen of her apartment, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee, staring out the window at the street below. Her body was sore from adrenaline's aftershock, her mind caught in the strange, disorienting quiet that follows chaos. The glass had been replaced, the broken door mended overnight by Vincent's people. From the outside it looked as though nothing had happened, but Maya knew better. Once violence steps over your threshold, the air never feels the same again. Leo sat at the table in his pajamas, his bear clutched tightly in one hand, the other picking at the crust of toast without appetite. The boy hadn't spoken much since the break-in. His wide eyes tracked every sound, every shadow. When Vincent entered the room, dressed again in that dark, commanding simplicity that made him seem untouchable, Leo immediately straightened, watching his father with quiet reverence. Vincent placed his phone on the counter. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it like the distant rumble of thunder. It wasn't random. They weren't after you, he said, looking at Maya. They were after him. Maya set the mug down slowly. Leo, he nodded. They wanted to take him alive. The implication settled like a stone in her stomach. Why? Vincent's gaze hardened. Because in my world, children aren't off limits. They're leverage. He paused, his jaw tightening. Leo is my greatest strength, and my greatest vulnerability. My enemies know that. Maya's throat went dry. Who are they? Vincent didn't answer immediately. He turned toward the window, his posture straight and controlled, but she could see the weight pressing down on his shoulders. Men I once trusted. Men who think they can break me by taking what I love. He exhaled slowly. They made their first move last night. I intend to make my last. Something in the way he said it made her chest tighten. It wasn't bravado. It was resolve, the kind of resolve that came from someone who had lived too long with blood debts and invisible scars. Vincent Maddox wasn't merely preparing to defend himself. He was preparing to end something. Later that day, Maya found herself sitting in the back of the Escalade again, Leo tucked against her side, his small hand gripping hers. She hadn't agreed to go anywhere. She had simply been swept along in the current of Vincent's decisions. His world didn't ask for permission. It moved like a tide, and she was caught in it whether she wanted to be or not. They drove to one of Vincent's properties on the outskirts of the city. From the outside it looked like a renovated warehouse, anonymous, unremarkable. But inside it was something else entirely. It was his fortress. Concrete walls reinforced with steel, surveillance monitors covering every angle, armed men moving with disciplined precision. Maya felt a chill as she stepped inside. She wasn't supposed to be here. Ordinary people didn't belong in places like this. Vincent gathered his men in a central room. The atmosphere was taut, like a string pulled to the point of breaking. Maps were spread out across the table, dotted with red marks that Maya didn't understand. But what she did understand was the language of faces. These men weren't soldiers. They were something older, more primal. They were loyal to Vincent not because of contracts, but because of history. "We hit back tonight," Vincent said, his voice slicing through the room like a blade. "They came for what's mine. Now we go for theirs." Maya watched, a knot forming in her chest. Leo stayed close to her, his small fingers never leaving hers. She looked down at him, at the innocence in his face, and felt the weight of something shift inside her. This wasn't about sides or debts anymore. This was about a child caught in the crossfire of grown men's choices, and she was here standing in the middle of it. Later, as the men prepared for whatever was coming, Vincent found her in one of the quiet hallways of the building. He approached her with the same deliberate stillness he always carried, but this time there was something different in his eyes, something almost vulnerable beneath the ice. "You don't have to be here," he said softly. Maya folded her arms, meeting his gaze. "I didn't exactly get a vote." He inclined his head slightly, conceding the point. "But you have one now. You can walk out that door. My men will take you to a safe house. You can disappear from this if that's what you want." Her instinct screamed yes. Yes, walk away. Yes, go back to the quiet life. Yes, close this chapter before it consumes you. But her eyes drifted to the nearby room where Leo sat drawing on a piece of scrap paper, his brow furrowed in the intense concentration only children possess. He trusted her. In some inexplicable way, he felt safer with her there, and she couldn't shake the feeling that if she left now, something irreversible would happen. She turned back to Vincent. "And if I stay? Then you step into my world fully," he said. "No illusions. No going back." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Maya exhaled, her voice steady. "I'm staying." Something flickered across his face, surprise quickly masked by that unreadable calm. "Why?" he asked. "Because he needs someone who's not part of this," she said, nodding toward Leo. "Someone who sees him for who he is, not for what he represents." Vincent's jaw tightened. For a heartbeat, the armor cracked and something real surfaced. Respect, gratitude, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. Redemption. The night that followed their decision was unlike any Maya had ever lived through. The warehouse was a hive of quiet, controlled activity. Vincent's men moved like shadows preparing for war, loading vehicles, checking weapons, communicating in terse, efficient whispers. Maya sat in one of the side rooms with Leo, trying to distract him with stories and sketches, but the tension in the air seeped through the walls like smoke. Even at his young age, Leo could feel it. He kept glancing at the door, listening to distant footsteps, his fingers tightening around her sleeve. Vincent entered the room briefly before leaving for the confrontation. He crouched down beside his son, resting a strong hand on Leo's small shoulder. "I'll be back," he said quietly, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Leo nodded solemnly, as if understanding more than a 5-year-old should have to. Vincent's eyes then met Maya's. There were no long explanations, no dramatic speeches. Just a silent exchange of trust, the kind that words could only cheapen. And then he was gone. Hours stretched like days. Maya paced the room, her nerves stretched thin. She wasn't part of their operation, but she had overheard enough to understand. Vincent wasn't going out for negotiations. He was going to finish something. She didn't know if he would come back. What she did know was that she couldn't let Leo sense her fear. So she masked it the way she used to with her young patients. Steady voice, calm hands, even when the world around was crumbling. But danger has a way of finding cracks. It began with a faint hum in the security feed, something subtle, a flicker in the corner monitor. One of Vincent's men muttered under his breath, stepping closer to the screens. A second flicker followed. Then, without warning, several feeds went black at once. The man barked into his radio, but the response was static. The power didn't go out, but the network was breached. Whoever Vincent was fighting wasn't content to wait for him to return. They were coming here. Maya's instinct snapped into focus. She grabbed Leo's hand. "Stay close to me," she whispered. Gunfire erupted outside the building, distant at first, then closer. The sound was unmistakable, controlled burst, not chaos. Whoever they were professionals. The men guarding the interior scrambled to defensive positions. One of them, a tall man with a scar along his jaw, motioned for her to move toward the back corridors. "Safe room." "Now," he barked. They ran. The sounds of the assault grew louder. The metallic clang of forced entry, the shouts of men, the pounding of boots. They reached the reinforced door to the safe room, but just as the guard began to input the code, a blast shook the hallway. Smoke and dust filled the air. The guard was thrown forward, hitting the wall hard. Maya shielded Leo with her body as debris rained down. Through the haze, 3 armed intruders emerged. Their faces were covered, but their movements were precise, deliberate. One of them pointed his weapon straight at Leo. Maya's blood went cold. Something primal surged through her then, not fear, but fierce, unyielding defiance. She stepped in front of Leo, arms spread instinctively as if her body alone could become a wall. Her voice, when it came, was steady, shocking even to her. "You'll have to get through me." For a heartbeat, everything froze. One of the men hesitated, surprised by the audacity of this unarmed woman standing in their way. That moment was all the fallen guard needed. With a growl, he lunged from the ground, firing a single, precise shot that struck the lead intruder in the chest. Chaos exploded. Maya grabbed Leo and darted toward the stairwell, dragging him behind her as bullets tore through the hallway. They hid behind a reinforced pillar. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum. but she held Leo close, whispering reassurances into his ear. "It's okay. I've got you. I won't let anything happen to you." Meanwhile, across the city, Vincent's confrontation with his enemies was reaching its climax. In a dimly lit warehouse, he stood face to face with the man who had once been his closest ally, a man named Corrado. Their rivalry had simmered for years, but the abduction attempt had made the line between them irrevocable. Corrado taunted him, claiming that no empire built on blood could end peacefully. Vincent's reply was cold and final. "Then it ends with yours." The gunfight that followed was brutal and quick. Vincent's men were efficient, but Corrado's forces were equally ruthless. Vincent moved like a storm through the fray, every strike precise, every shot purposeful. But when a call came through his encrypted line, a single urgent sentence from one of his guards, his blood ran cold. "They've breached the fortress." For the first time that night, fear entered his eyes, not for himself but for Leo. Without hesitation, he abandoned the fight. Corrado tried to flee, but Vincent left that to his men. His only thought was getting back to his son. Back at the warehouse, Maya's courage was being tested in ways she hadn't imagined. One of the attackers cornered them near the stairwell. Maya pushed Leo behind her, grabbing a metal pipe from the ground. She wasn't trained. She wasn't armed, but she swung with everything she had. The pipe struck the man's wrist, knocking his gun loose. She kicked it away, adrenaline roaring through her veins. The man snarled, reaching for her. But before he could, a single gunshot echoed through the corridor. Vincent stood at the end of the hallway, weapon still raised, his face a mask of fury and relief. The intruder fell. For a long second, Vincent's eyes met Maya's. There were no words, only the undeniable fact that she had stood between death and his son. He strode forward, scooping Leo into his arms. The boy clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. Vincent's free hand reached out, briefly gripping Maya's arm. Not out of control, but gratitude. "You kept him safe," he said, voice raw. "You kept him alive." Maya, breathless and shaking, managed a small nod. "That's what you do for people you care about." The words struck him harder than bullets. In his world, loyalty was currency, fear was control, and trust was rare. But this woman had risked everything without expectation, without reward. Something inside him shifted, a tectonic movement in a man who had lived too long in shadows. The days that followed were quieter. Corrado's organization collapsed after his death. Vincent's world, though still dangerous, stabilized. Security around Leo tightened. The men who had attacked the warehouse were found and dealt with. For once, the constant hum of impending violence receded. Maya returned to her small apartment one afternoon, expecting to find it empty. Instead, she found Vincent waiting in the hallway, not in his usual suit, but in a simple shirt and jeans. He looked human, not the untouchable figure she'd first met in the alley, but a man standing at the edge of something unfamiliar. "I wanted to say something," he began, his voice unusually hesitant. "What you did that night, no one has ever stood like that for him, for us." Maya crossed her arms, half teasing, half serious. "You're not exactly the kind of guy people line up to protect." His mouth twitched. "True, but you did." He stepped closer. "You changed something, in me, in how I see the world." She didn't know how to respond. She wasn't looking for grand confessions or impossible promises. But she did know that something had changed in her too. She had walked into a storm and come out not as the broken nurse who had run from her past, but as someone who had faced fear head-on and found strength she didn't know she still possessed. Leo appeared from behind Vincent, running to her with a wide smile. "Maya!" He wrapped his arms around her waist and she bent down to hug him tightly. In that moment, the chaos, the fear, the walls between their worlds faded, leaving only something simple and profound: connection. Vincent watched them, a faint smile breaking through the last remnants of his cold armor. "He doesn't let go of people easily," he said softly. "Neither do I." The sun dipped low, casting warm light through the hallway windows. Maya looked at them, father and son, and felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the naive kind, but the quiet, steady hope that comes after surviving a storm. Their story wasn't about a mafia boss and a nurse anymore. It was about broken people finding unexpected strength in each other, about redemption through courage, about love, not the romantic kind, but the fierce, protective love that binds strangers into something like family. And in that golden light, As Leo's laughter echoed down the hall and Vincent's guarded eyes softened, Maya realized that her life had changed forever. Not because she had saved a boy in an alley, but because in doing so she had saved a part of herself she thought was gone. The world collides. The ride in the Escalade felt like crossing a threshold into another universe. Maya had never been inside a car so polished, so silently powerful. The leather seats smelled faintly of cedar and expensive cologne, the kind of detail that spoke of wealth beyond her imagination. Yet the air inside the vehicle was tense, coiled like a spring. Vincent Maddox sat across from her, his son cradled protectively against his chest. His sharp profile was illuminated by the faint glow of the overhead light, angular jaw, pale gray eyes that reflected nothing but calculation, and the faint scar running along his temple that made him look like a man carved from battles, both visible and hidden. Maya sat stiffly, her wet clothes sticking uncomfortably to the leather. The warmth of the car did little to calm the racing of her heart. She felt out of place, like a trespasser who had stumbled into a palace by accident. Every detail screamed money and power, from the gleaming onyx watch clasped around Vincent's wrist to the silent efficiency of his bodyguards who sat like statues in the front seat, eyes scanning the streets as if the night itself could pose a threat. Her gaze dropped to Leo, the little boy she had pulled from the brink of death. His face had regained some color, his breathing more even now, but his small body remained curled into his father's arms. Vincent stroked his son's hair with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the cold, hard demeanor he had shown earlier. It was jarring, almost disorienting to witness the paradox of this man, the ruthless, commanding presence who had roared at her in the alley, and this quiet father whose entire being seemed anchored in the fragile weight of a child. Maya wanted to say something, but her voice seemed stuck in her throat. She pressed her hands together in her lap, her palms still trembling from the adrenaline. What kind of man ordered a stranger not to call 911, who appeared within minutes in a car flanked by bodyguards? Her instincts screamed that she had walked into something dangerous, something far larger than a simple act of kindness. Finally, Vincent broke the silence. His voice was low, steady, but edged with steel. "You should not have touched him." Maya snapped her head up. "If I hadn't, your son would have died." For a moment, his eyes met hers, sharp as broken glass. Then unexpectedly, his expression softened, not with gratitude, but with acknowledgement. "You were right," he admitted, the words slow, reluctant, as if dragged out of him. "But in my world, trust is complicated." Maya frowned. "In your world? What does that even mean?" "He's a child. He needed help. There's no world in that. There's just life and death." Vincent's lips curved faintly, not in amusement, but in something closer to intrigue. "You speak like someone who has nothing to lose. That makes you bold. Maybe too bold." Maya bristled. "I don't think saving a child's life counts as being bold. It's just being human." Silence filled the car again. She realized she might have crossed a line, but she couldn't bring herself to take the words back. This man radiated power, danger, authority, but she refused to let him intimidate her into silence. Not after what she had just done. The Escalade rolled through the city, leaving behind the worn, crumbling sidewalks of Maya's neighborhood and entering streets lined with towering glass buildings, elegant restaurants with velvet ropes and storefronts gleaming with wealth she rarely encountered. The contrast was almost painful. Maya pressed her forehead briefly against the window, staring at the glittering skyline reflected in the drizzle. This was not her world. She belonged to cracked pavement, discounted groceries, secondhand coats, and relentless work schedules. And yet, somehow, fate had tied her to this man and his fragile child in a single night. When the SUV finally slowed, Maya blinked in disbelief. The car had pulled up before a sprawling mansion on the edge of the city, surrounded by wrought iron gates that glistened with rain. Security lights cast long beams across the manicured lawns, and cameras tracked their arrival with silent precision. The gates opened automatically, revealing a driveway paved with polished stone that led to a home so large it seemed almost unreal. Columns rose toward the misty night sky. Windows glowed with warm amber light, and a fleet of luxury cars sat neatly parked along one side like trophies. Maya stared, her breath catching. She had never been so close to this kind of opulence. It was the kind of place she'd only seen in magazines at the doctor's office or glimpsed through the screens of television shows that had nothing to do with her reality. She felt a sudden crushing awareness of her own damp coat, the frayed strap of her purse, the tired lines beneath her eyes. She didn't belong here. Vincent noticed her silence. Intimidating, isn't it? She looked at him startled. His gaze was unreadable, as if he had seen this reaction countless times before. It's excessive, she replied, her voice steady though her heart raced. For the first time that evening, Vincent's mouth curved into a faint smile. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Honest. Not many people would call it that to my face. Before she could respond, the car door opened. One of the bodyguards gestured for her to step out. Maya hesitated, then followed Vincent as he carried his son inside. The mansion's interior was even more breathtaking than its exterior. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Art lined the walls, pieces she recognized vaguely from history books and museum brochures. Everything about the space radiated wealth and power, but beneath it was a current of something colder, heavier, as if the very walls held secrets whispered through decades of deals and decisions that shaped lives. A woman in a tailored uniform appeared instantly, bowing her head slightly. "Sir, should I call the doctor?" Vincent gave a curt nod. "Yes, have him come immediately. And make sure the east wing is cleared." The woman disappeared without another word. Maya followed them into a grand sitting room where Vincent gently laid Leo onto an oversized sofa. He crouched beside his son, adjusting the blanket that a servant had quickly brought. Maya hovered a few steps back, uncertain if she should stay. Every fiber of her being screamed that she had already done enough, that she should quietly slip away before she became entangled in whatever shadowy world this man ruled. But then Leo stirred, his small hand reaching blindly toward the space where she stood. His weak voice cracked through the silence. "The lady?" Vincent's head snapped toward Maya, his expression unreadable. For a moment neither of them moved. Then with a quiet sigh, Vincent spoke. "Stay, until the doctor arrives." Maya hesitated. I insist," he said, his tone brooking no argument, so she stayed. Minutes later, a man with a medical bag arrived, clearly not an ordinary family doctor, but someone accustomed to discretion. He examined Leo carefully, confirmed the glucose had stabilized him, and assured Vincent that with rest and monitoring the boy would recover. Vincent dismissed the doctor with a nod, his attention never straying far from his son. When the room finally emptied, Vincent straightened and turned to Maya. "You saved him. That cannot be denied." Maya crossed her arms, exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. "I didn't do it for you. I did it because he's a child. That's all." Vincent studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense as if he were peeling back layers she didn't even know she had. "You think that makes you free from my debt?" "I don't want your debt," she said firmly. "That," Vincent murmured, stepping closer, his voice low, "is exactly what makes you different." "And dangerous," Maya held his gaze, refusing to flinch. She didn't understand this man, his world, or why fate had brought her into his orbit. But deep down, in the marrow of her bones, she knew this was only the beginning of something that would change everything. Her life, his, and perhaps even the fragile boy who had clung to her in the snow. The discovery. The night had settled like a heavy blanket over the city, pressing its damp chill into every crack and corner. Rain had turned to a soft, misty drizzle, and the yellow streetlights along Fenmore Street glowed like tired eyes. Maya Williams pulled her worn scarf tighter around her neck as she hurried down the uneven sidewalk, her breath fogging the air in short, exhausted bursts. It had been another 12-hour shift at the pharmacy, an endless stream of prescriptions, impatient customers, and a manager who cared more about sales targets than the humans standing behind the counter. All Maya wanted was to get home, warm up a bowl of leftover mac and cheese, and collapse on her couch with her old blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She wasn't supposed to be on Fenmore tonight. The main bus route was closed for maintenance, and she decided to cut through the side streets to shave off 10 minutes. She regretted it the moment her boots splashed into a deep puddle, soaking her socks. But something made her pause as she neared the alley between the hardware store and the old print shop, a faint shape half hidden behind a dumpster, like an abandoned bag or a forgotten bundle of clothes. At first she thought it was just that, trash. People dumped things here all the time. But then she saw them, tiny sneakers, blue with Velcro straps, their tips poking out from the slush. Maya froze. A prickle of unease ran up her spine. She took a cautious step closer, peering through the dim light. The bundle wasn't trash. It was a child. Her heart lurched. She dropped to her knees beside him, not caring that the cold slush soaked through her stockings. The boy was no older than 5. His skin was pale, lips tinged a frightening blue, breath shallow and ragged. His coat was expensive, tailored wool with a cashmere scarf neatly tucked under his chin, but he lay there as if forgotten by the world. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Pulse. Faint. Too faint. Maya's training kicked in before fear could paralyze her. Once upon a time, she had been a nurse in the pediatric ICU. Life had taken unexpected turns since then, but some instincts never left you. She quickly checked his airway, tilted his head slightly, and placed her ear near his mouth. There was breath, but it was irregular, fluttering like a moth trapped in a jar. His forehead was clammy. His hands were cold as ice. She tapped his cheek gently. Hey, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice trembling but calm. Can you hear me? No response. His eyelids fluttered weakly. She noticed a medical bracelet partially hidden under his sleeve. She pushed the fabric up and squinted in the dim light. The engraving was faded but clear enough. Type 1 diabetes. Oh no, Maya whispered. You're crashing, aren't you? She fumbled through her worn leather purse, her cold fingers moving on instinct. Even though she wasn't working in the hospital anymore, she still carried a small emergency glucose injector. Old habits. You never knew when someone on the street might need help. Her fingers closed around the injector and she yanked it out. For a second, doubt flickered. She didn't know this child. She didn't know his parents. What if they blamed her? What if she made it worse? Then she looked at his lips again, turning deeper blue, and she made her decision. There was no time to wait. It's going to sting, she murmured, more to herself than to him. But this is going to help. She pushed the injector through the fabric of his pants into his thigh and pressed the plunger. The medication flowed in. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then his body jerked violently. His back arched, his mouth opened in a silent cry, and his limbs convulsed. Maya's pulse raced. She checked his airway again. He was still breathing, shallow but present. His pulse fluttered beneath her fingers like a bird trapped in a storm. She kept talking to him softly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you. You're not alone. Just hold on a little longer. She pulled out her phone with her free hand, intending to dial emergency services. But something unexpected happened. As she checked the boy's coat for any ID, her fingers brushed against a card tucked into the inner pocket. A single phone number, nothing else, no name, no instructions. Just digits written in a bold hand. Something about it made her hesitate. Still, it was better than nothing. She dialed. The line clicked on after one ring. Who is this? A man's voice demanded, deep, calm, and frighteningly controlled. Maya swallowed. I found a boy behind Fenmore Street. He's unconscious. He has a medical bracelet. He's not breathing right. There was silence for half a second. Then the man spoke, his tone icy but precise. Where exactly are you? Behind the hardware store near the alley, she said quickly. He's crashing. I'm a nurse. I gave him glucose, but you need to get here. Don't call 911, he interrupted. Maya blinked. What, sir? He needs medical. Do not call 911, the man repeated, his voice firm as steel. Stay there. Do not move. Then the line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, stunned. No name, no thank you. Just a command. A part of her screamed that she should call the paramedics anyway. But she looked down at the boy, his tiny fingers curling weakly against her sleeve, his breath evening out slightly after the injection. And she made a choice. She would stay at least for a few minutes. Whoever that man was, he sounded like someone who was already on his way. The sound of tires slicing through wet pavement snapped her attention back to the mouth of the alley. A black Cadillac Escalade rolled to a stop, its headlights slicing through the mist. The doors opened almost in unison. 3 men stepped out, 2 broad-shouldered bodyguards in dark coats and a tall figure whose presence cut through the cold night like a blade. Maya's breath caught. Even in the dim light, his aura was unmistakable. Authority sharp and dangerous. He strode forward with measured steps, his long black wool coat trailing behind him. His face was striking but severe, pale gray eyes scanning the scene like a hawk. In a heartbeat, those eyes landed on her. On a tired black woman kneeling in the slush, holding his unconscious son. His voice, when it came, was a roar that echoed off the brick walls. What the hell are you doing to my son? Maya jerked her head up, heart pounding. He's diabetic. He was crashing. I gave him glucose. You injected him? His tone sharpened like a blade. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, looming over her. Who gave you the right? I saved him. Maya snapped back before she could stop herself, rising to her feet, refusing to cower. He was seizing. I'm trained. I did what any real nurse would do. The alley fell silent except for the falling drizzle. The man's fist clenched at his sides. For a long, tense moment, his icy gaze locked with hers. Then, beneath the tension, something shifted. The boy stirred in her arms. A soft whimper escaped his lips. His small hand reached out weakly and grabbed Maya's sleeve, as if he instinctively trusted the warmth she offered. The man's expression faltered. He dropped to one knee beside them, his hand brushing his son's forehead. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter. Leo, Maya exhaled. He's alive. You got lucky I was the one walking by. He looked at her again, this time with a more complex expression, something between suspicion and reluctant respect. You didn't call the cops. You told me not to, she replied simply. He gave a single, deliberate nod. Then he lifted the boy into his arms with surprising tenderness, wrapping his own coat around the small body. Leo stirred again, murmuring something unintelligible against his father's chest. The man turned to leave, but then paused. He looked at Maya over his shoulder. His voice was lower now, but still carried that edge of power. Come with me. What? Maya blinked. No, I need to go home. You saved my son's life, he said, his gaze unreadable. And I don't leave debts unpaid. I didn't do it for payment, Maya said firmly. That made something flicker across his face, an almost imperceptible smile, or maybe a shadow of one. He muttered something under his breath. That makes you even more dangerous. Before she could respond, one of the bodyguards opened the car door. The man stepped inside with his son, the warmth of the SUV swallowing them. The other guard gestured for her to follow. Maya stood there for a heartbeat, drenched and exhausted, wondering what on earth she had just stepped into. She could have walked away. She could have turned her back. But when she looked at the boy's pale face nestled against his father's chest, something inside her whispered that this moment, this unexpected night, was going to change everything. And with that, she took a hesitant step toward the car.